John Parker had always prided himself on leading a balanced life. At 42, he had built a stable career as a civil engineer, achieved moderate success, and created a comfortable home for his family in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He was a man who valued integrity and commitment, and he brought those values into his marriage with Lisa, his high school sweetheart. Lisa Parker, 39, had been a devoted wife and mother. She worked as a part-time graphic designer, balancing her career with raising their only child, Emily. At 16, Emily was a bright and talented teenager, known for her enthusiasm for music and her close-knit relationship with both parents. The Parkers seemed like the quintessential family. They attended community events, hosted barbecues, and took family vacations together. John had always felt fortunate to have a partner who supported him and a daughter who brought joy into his life. But everything changed one fateful evening. It was a crisp autumn night, the kind that heralded the approaching winter. John had come home early from work, eager to surprise his family with a homemade dinner. He carried the aroma of his famous lasagna, prepared with a recipe passed down from his grandmother. As he approached the front door, he heard laughter from inside the house. It was a warm, inviting sound, but something about it made him pause. He was about to open the door when a sudden noise, a muffled conversation, caught his attention. Curiosity, driven by a sense of something being amiss, led him to press his ear against the door. At first, he could only make out indistinguishable chatter, but then he heard Emily's voice clearly, filled with an excited tone. "Mom, your boyfriend's Johnson is awesome. Thanks for sharing him with me. Next time, he wants you to join." The words hit John like a sledgehammer. His heart pounded violently, and he felt an icy shiver run down his spine. He had always suspected Lisa's growing distance, but never imagined such a betrayal. His mind raced as he tried to process what he had just overheard. Emily had spoken about her mother's boyfriend with a familiarity that went beyond mere acquaintance. The mention of Johnson seemed to indicate a more intimate connection, and the casual mention of Lisa joining in left no room for doubt. Stunned, John stumbled back from the door, the lasagna slipping from his grasp and shattering on the porch. He stood frozen in shock, feeling as if the world had collapsed around him. He turned on his heel and walked away from the house, not looking back. He needed space to think, to breathe. His thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and disbelief. John's departure was sudden and unexplained. He packed a few essentials into a suitcase and left behind a note that simply read, "I can't stay. I need time to figure things out. Please respect my privacy." He didn't specify where he was going or when he might return. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, was now eerily silent. Over the next few days, Lisa was bewildered and heartbroken by John's disappearance. She searched for him, but he was nowhere to be found. Their friends and neighbors were equally perplexed, and rumors began to circulate about the sudden and unexplained departure. Emily, caught between her loyalty to her parents and the shame of her own actions, remained silent, her teenage facade of confidence crumbling beneath the weight of her guilt. John, meanwhile, had retreated to a modest rental cabin in the woods, far from the life he had known. He spent his days in solitude, trying to come to terms with the shock and planning his next steps. The betrayal was so profound that it felt like a wound that would never heal. He had always been a man of action, and in his heart, he knew that simply walking away wasn't enough. Determined to understand the full extent of the betrayal and to seek justice, John decided to hire a private investigator, a seasoned professional named Mark Turner. Turner was known for his discretion and effectiveness, and he quickly became an invaluable ally. John's request was straightforward: uncover the truth about Lisa's relationship with her boss, Richard Evans, a wealthy and influential businessman who had recently moved to town. Turner's investigation revealed a disturbing picture. Richard Evans, 52, had a reputation for both charm and ruthlessness. His business dealings were often shrouded in secrecy, and whispers of corruption followed him wherever he went. The investigator discovered that Lisa and Richard's relationship went beyond mere infidelity. They were deeply entangled in a web of corruption and illegal activities. Richard's influence extended into the very fabric of the community, and his dealings were far from clean. John was horrified to learn that Lisa had not only betrayed him but had also exposed Emily to this dangerous world. Lisa's involvement with Richard had put their daughter in harm's way, and the gravity of the situation was overwhelming. The revelation that Lisa had been complicit in Richard's illegal activities was the final blow. John felt a deep sense of betrayal, not just from his wife but from the entire world he had once trusted. With Turner's help, John compiled evidence of Richard's criminal activities and Lisa's role in them. It was a painstaking process, but the evidence was damning. The final blow came when John discovered that Lisa had used her access to Richard's resources to aid his illicit enterprises, implicating herself in a range of crimes. John's sense of justice and the need for closure drove him to act decisively. He approached law enforcement with the evidence Turner had gathered, and soon Richard Evans and Lisa Parker were facing serious charges. The media coverage of the case was intense, and John's name was rarely mentioned. His quest for revenge had succeeded, but the personal cost was immense. His family was in ruins, and Emily was left to navigate a world that had been irreparably changed. As Lisa and Richard faced their legal battles, John tried to distance himself from the chaos. He needed to rebuild his life, away from the shadows of his past. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but he hoped that time would eventually heal the wounds. Little did he know that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would test his resilience and redefine his understanding of family and forgiveness. 5 years had passed since John Parker's life was turned upside down by the betrayal of his wife, Lisa, and the revelation of her affair with Richard Evans. The passage of time had given him the space to rebuild, though the scars of his past remained etched deeply into his heart. John had relocated to a small town far from the life he once knew, working as an independent consultant in civil engineering. He had managed to create a semblance of normalcy, but the shadows of his former life lingered, occasionally creeping into his thoughts. John's new life was quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil he had left behind. The small-town atmosphere was soothing, offering a retreat from the frenetic pace of his previous existence. He had settled into a modest house on the outskirts of town, where the silence was a comfort rather than a void. His days were filled with routine, working from home, occasional socializing with new acquaintances, and finding solace in the solitude of his surroundings. Yet the sense of unresolved issues from his past continued to haunt him, manifesting in restless nights and fleeting memories of happier times. One crisp autumn afternoon, as John was sifting through a pile of paperwork in his study, he heard a knock on the door. It was unexpected, as he rarely received visitors. He opened the door to find a young woman standing on his doorstep, looking pale and distraught. Her head was shaved, and her eyes were hollow with a mixture of fear and resignation. For a moment, John didn't recognize her. "Dad," the woman said in a trembling voice. John's heart skipped a beat. He recognized her immediately as Emily, his daughter. The sight of her, so changed from the vibrant teenager he had once known, struck him with a mix of shock and profound sadness. "Emily?" John said, his voice barely a whisper. "What happened to you?" Emily stepped inside the house, her movements hesitant. She was visibly shaken, her body trembling as she sat down in a chair. John quickly made her a cup of tea, his hands shaking as he prepared it. He sat across from her, trying to process the enormity of the situation. "It's a long story," Emily began, her voice cracking. "I didn't know where else to go. I had to leave." John listened intently as Emily recounted the last 5 years of her life. After John's abrupt departure, Lisa had struggled to cope with the consequences of her actions. Her legal troubles, coupled with the fallout from Richard's arrest, had plunged the family into chaos. With her own prospects dwindling and her finances strained, Lisa was forced to make increasingly desperate choices. Emily, now a teenager grappling with the loss of her family's stability, found herself adrift. Her mother's involvement with Richard's criminal activities had isolated them from their community and friends. As Lisa's financial situation worsened, she fell deeper into Richard's remaining network of corrupt associates. The influence of these individuals loomed large over their lives, casting a dark shadow over Emily's adolescence. In the midst of the turmoil, Emily had tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She excelled academically and clung to her music as an escape from the chaos. But as time passed, the pressure and the weight of her mother's decisions began to take a toll on her mental health. Lisa's erratic behavior and financial desperation led her to make a series of poor decisions, ultimately putting Emily in a dangerous position. Emily's voice grew softer as she spoke of a particularly harrowing period. "Mom got involved with some of Richard's old associates. They weren't just criminals. They were dangerous people. They threatened us, and when Mom couldn't pay them off, they took it out on me." John's heart sank as he listened to Emily's account of the abuse and manipulation she had endured. It became clear that Lisa's choices had exposed Emily to a world of suffering that no child should ever experience. The details were both shocking and heartbreaking. Emily had been subjected to psychological abuse and threats, and had been coerced into situations that left deep emotional scars. Her mother, despite her initial intentions to protect Emily, had been unable to shield her from the consequences of her involvement with Richard's network. As Emily continued to speak, she revealed that her life had spiraled further when she had attempted to escape the situation. She had managed to leave her mother's home, but not without consequences. Her departure was a desperate act of self-preservation, and it led her to seek refuge in various places, each time moving on as soon as she felt safe. Her appearance, with a shaved head and worn clothes, was a testament to the turmoil she had endured. "I couldn't stay with Mom anymore," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "She kept telling me it would get better, but things just got worse. I had to leave to survive. I didn't know if you'd even want to see me, but I had nowhere else to go." John's heart ached as he took in Emily's words. He felt a surge of guilt and sorrow for not being there for her during those formative years. He had been so consumed by his own sense of betrayal and the quest for justice that he had failed to recognize the full impact of Lisa's actions on their daughter. "I'm so sorry, Emily," John said, his voice filled with emotion. "I never wanted this to happen. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving. I didn't realize how much you were suffering." Emily nodded, her gaze filled with a mixture of relief and continued sadness. "It's not your fault, Dad. I just needed to find you. I didn't know what else to do." John took Emily's hand in his, holding it gently. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, and he knew that rebuilding their relationship would be a complex and delicate process. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. His daughter was in need of his support and love, and he was determined to provide both. "Let's start by getting you settled," John said, standing up. "You're safe here now. We'll figure things out together. You're not alone." As they began to discuss the next steps, John realized that their journey was far from over. The shadows of the past still loomed, but they had the chance to forge a new path forward. The scars of betrayal and the remnants of old grievances would need to be addressed, but the bond between father and daughter was a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. John's decision to take Emily in marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that would test their resilience and challenge their understanding of family, forgiveness, and redemption. They had both been through unimaginable trials, but together, they would confront the remnants of their past and strive to build a future free from the shadows of their former lives. John Parker's quiet life had been irrevocably disrupted by Emily's unexpected return. The revelation of her suffering, coupled with the persistent shadows of his past, had created a storm of emotions that John struggled to navigate. Yet amid the tumult, one thing became clear. He had to protect his daughter and confront the remnants of the dark world that had so deeply impacted their lives. In the weeks following Emily's arrival, John focused on providing her with a semblance of normalcy. He enrolled her in a local high school and began the process of seeking counseling for her emotional scars. Their daily routine began to settle, though the weight of their shared history loomed over them. John found solace in small victories, seeing Emily smile for the first time in years, hearing her talk about her hopes for the future. These moments of connection were precious, but they did little to erase the urgency of the threats that still hung over them. Despite the calm facade, John knew that Richard Evans' criminal network was far from dismantled. The fallout from Richard's arrest had only made his associates more desperate and dangerous. Lisa's brief stint in prison had done little to dissuade Richard's associates from seeking revenge or continuing their illicit activities. The tension in the air was palpable, and John knew that protecting Emily meant confronting these lingering threats head-on. One evening, as John and Emily were sharing dinner, the phone rang. John's heart raced as he picked it up, recognizing the caller ID. It was Mark Turner, the private investigator who had helped him in the past. Mark's voice, usually calm and collected, carried a note of urgency. "John, we've got a situation," Mark said. "I've been tracking Richard's associates, and it looks like they're planning something big. I'm afraid they're targeting you and Emily." The news hit John like a bolt of lightning. He had hoped that by removing Richard from the equation, he had secured some measure of safety. But the remnants of Richard's network were still a formidable threat. "Are you sure about this?" John asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Positive," Mark replied. "I have been able to gather intel on their activities. They're looking for revenge and have been monitoring your movements. It's only a matter of time before they make a move." John's mind raced as he tried to devise a plan. He knew that confronting the threat directly was risky, but hiding was not an option. He had already experienced the devastating effects of running from problems. This time, he needed to take a stand. "All right, Mark, what do you suggest we do?" John asked, his voice resolute. Mark's advice was pragmatic. "First, you need to secure your home and make sure Emily is safe. I'll arrange for a few of my contacts to provide security for you. Meanwhile, I'll dig deeper into their plans and see if we can get ahead of them." With Mark's plan in motion, John set about fortifying his home. He installed additional security measures and began keeping a low profile, making sure to avoid any patterns that might make it easier for the criminals to track him. Despite these precautions, the tension was unrelenting. Every creak of the house and every passing car felt like a potential threat. 1 week later, John and Emily were having a quiet evening at home when they heard a loud knock on the door. John's instincts were on high alert. He peeked through the peephole and saw a familiar face. It was Mark Turner, looking tense and disheveled. "John, we've got a problem," Mark said as John opened the door. "They're making their move tonight. We need to evacuate immediately." Panic surged through John, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What's happening?" "There's been a breach in their plan. I have reason to believe they're coming for you now, and they're not alone," Mark explained. "We don't have much time. Grab whatever you can, and let's go." John quickly gathered a few essentials and made sure Emily was ready to leave. He could see the fear in her eyes, but he offered her a reassuring smile. "We'll be okay. Just stick with me." Mark led them to a secure location, a safe house arranged by his contacts. The place was a stark contrast to the familiarity of John's home, a well-fortified property on the outskirts of town, equipped with surveillance and defensive measures. John and Emily settled in, though the sense of security was tempered by the knowledge that they were still in danger. As night fell, Mark's contacts maintained a vigilant watch over the safe house. John, Emily, and Mark waited in anxious silence, their nerves frayed by the uncertainty of the situation. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. Around midnight, the tranquility was shattered by the sound of shattering glass. The intruders had breached the perimeter. Mark's contacts sprang into action, engaging in a tense standoff with the attackers. John and Emily huddled together in a secure room, their hearts pounding as they heard the muffled sounds of confrontation outside. John's mind raced as he tried to stay calm for Emily's sake. He could hear the voices of the attackers, their threats and demands mingling with the sounds of struggle. The safe house's security systems were holding, but it was clear that the situation was critical. After what felt like hours, the sounds of the confrontation began to fade. Mark's contacts managed to repel the attackers, but the ordeal was far from over. Mark entered the room, looking relieved but grim. "They're gone for now," Mark said, his voice taut with exhaustion. "But this isn't over. We need to find out who's behind this and ensure they're brought to justice." John and Emily were shaken but unharmed. The immediate danger had passed, but the events of the night underscored the gravity of their situation. John knew that their safety was precarious and that they had to act decisively to put an end to the threats that loomed over them. In the days that followed, Mark intensified his investigation into Richard's associates. With the help of law enforcement, they were able to track down key members of the criminal network and gather evidence that would lead to their arrests. The effort was arduous, but the breakthrough came when they uncovered a crucial piece of information linking the remaining associates to a planned attack on the safe house. The final confrontation was swift and decisive. Law enforcement, acting on the evidence gathered, conducted a series of raids that dismantled the remaining elements of Richard's network. The arrests were highly publicized, and the criminal activities that had once threatened John and Emily's lives were brought to light. Lisa's legal troubles continued, but she was now a secondary concern compared to the dismantling of Richard's criminal empire. John's focus shifted to rebuilding his life with Emily, free from the immediate threat of violence. The ordeal had taken its toll on both father and daughter. They had faced unimaginable trials, but they emerged from the experience with a newfound strength and understanding. Their bond, tested by adversity, had been forged anew. John and Emily began to rebuild their lives, focusing on healing and moving forward. The scars of the past would always remain, but they had faced the darkness together and emerged into a brighter future. They found solace in each other's company and worked towards creating a life that honored their resilience and hope for a better tomorrow. The final stand had been more than just a battle against external threats. It had been a journey of rediscovery and redemption. John and Emily had reclaimed their lives from the shadows of their past and were determined to embrace the future with courage and optimism. The road ahead was uncertain, but they faced it together, united by their shared strength and unbreakable bond.